Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly, and spying on you all through his pink moon grapefruit is my co-host, Matt Freeman. How's it going, Matt?
If you podcast me, Scott, then podcast me.
Say it again, and I will.
Maybe later.
This week, part 2, Susan, comes to a close as we talk about chapters 9, 10, and the Interlude. 2 chapters absolutely stuffed with oaths and responsibilities in their battles with Love and Ka. And as always, Matt, Ka wins. Mm-hmm. Roland and Susan's passions finally ignite, and Susan is officially no longer honest, but Roland is, telling Susan his name, why he's here, and what he thinks the good man is up to. The two lovebirds decide that come reap, Susan will no longer be off with the mayor, but off with Roland instead. But tensions mount around them as Rhea, Cordelia, and the big coffin boys all have their sights on stopping the little coffin boys and their plans. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
It was great. I had a hard time sort of summing it all up in one pithy little blurb, actually. There's a lot of great relationship kind of teenage romance stuff that just really, really reminds you of what it was like to be young. And clearly we're bringing things into Doom. Doom is near. The text is telling us quite literally that they're dooming themselves. And you're like, okay, all right.
I kind of like how King played the long game with the will they, won't they of it, right? Like, we've been comparing this to Romeo and Juliet a lot, and Romeo and Juliet basically were like, day one, yep, we're in. Mm-hmm. And Susan and Roland, this has actually, like, a couple months have gone by, or at least 1 month has gone by since Roland has gotten here by the time they actually break Susan's vow. Mm-hmm. Which is, like, I think that gives them a little more credit than with the disparaging old people we've been this whole time. Have been like, these young kids, these stupid, like, they at least like tried, quote unquote, to stop this from happening. Yeah.
Well, it's true, because they both seem to know what a bad idea it is intellectually. Mm-hmm. And they both are like smart, and fairly like willful people, but I think that it just sort of gradually ground them down.
Yeah.
And I agree with you though, that it definitely it took longer than I thought it would. In fact, I think there were points where I was like, I wonder if this isn't all like a fun trick that King has pulled on us, where we're gonna, like, Susan will go to her death without them ever actually shacking up, and you'll be like, oh, like they never did consummate their relationship, and then that would be like an interesting kind of twist or surprise, like maybe Roland remembers things wrong or something. We didn't go that way, obviously, but I like, it took so long that I was starting to wonder if there wasn't something in play like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, well, let's get right into it, Matt. We got lots to talk about. 2 very, very stuffed chapters this week, and a little tiny baby interlude at the end of them.
Cool.
So we begin in chapter 9, titled Sitco, and our chapter begins as the time of the peddler's moon begins to end, along with, quote, the fairest part of the summer, which is, of course, another wonderful symbol about how everything is going to get worse, right? Like the fairest part of our story is coming to a close as the peddler's. goes, and the future is only going to be bad. We're in Susan's point of view again, and the mozo of the mayor's house, Miguel, comes to bring her another gift from Mayor Thorin, another horse, this one named Felicia. Mozo, by the way, is Spanish for waiter, and we actually see here that they actually do speak Spanish in Hambry. Like, we have Susan speaking to Miguel, saying, gracias, 1,000 thanks, old father. De nada, he replied, and handed her the bridle, which is another fun little interesting detail that I think sets your mind worrying a little bit here. I think there have been hints for a while that Magus has been a very Hispanic-influenced place, but now we're making it pretty textual. This is actually why, like, we've had several emails over the past couple weeks about the pronunciation of Magus, where I have actually in the past have said it Mayhis, because that's kind of what the J sounds like in Spanish, and it feels like a Spanish word, right? But I've kind of settled on Magus because that's what the audiobook says, and I've defaulted to that interpretation. And like internally wrestling with this in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe maybe this is the pronunciation we're getting because we're being told the story from Roland, and Roland doesn't actually know how to pronounce the word, right? And he's just saying it wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a made up word. What's funny is it does look like a Spanish word. In fact, I think when I first saw it, I thought maybe it was, but it's a made up word. So
yeah,
it could be pronounced however King wants.
Right. Like, I mean, like the word mijo in Spanish has a J in it. It's M-I-J-O. And that's how you pronounce it. So Magus would definitely be Mejis, because the E in Spanish is pronounced like an A. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's it's interesting.
I mean, there's a city in Tejas called San Jacinto. So I mean, once one language has a way of twisting words from other languages to mean other things, especially in place names. So
I do love. I had a friend that lived most of his life up in Detroit, and he came down to Dallas for work. And he there's a street in Dallas called San Jacinto, and he's like, I'm lost. I don't know where I am. And I was like, what street are you on? I don't want to say because I'm going to say it wrong. And I was like, okay, just go ahead. And he's like, Sanjasino.
I mean,
but even San Jacinto is technically not
San Jacinto.
Yeah, right. That's technically not correct.
That's what I was trying to say. Is it should be San Jacinto, and I mean, I think this happens with a lot of American cities actually, where they had originally Spanish names. So anyway, the point is maybe Magus was supposed to be a Spanish town that then became anglicized. So here's the thing, is that I got really hung up on the Spanish thing actually, because we talked previously about how I was confused because Susan's name is Delgado, and I'm like, God, they speak. What's that? Why is it a Spanish last name? And then it's revealed that people totally do speak Spanish here. But then I'm like, wait a minute. I thought the language they're speaking wasn't even English. Like, right? Like, isn't it the case that the Earth folk, the Katet, can only understand Midworld language because of like magic having to do with Roland, or is that just the high speech of Gilead and everybody else is speaking English? If so, why does everybody in English speak? Why does everybody in Midworld speak English? That's weird. That doesn't make sense. I mean, and then like, why are there people in this dimension that looks like the Old West speaking English and Spanish? I don't know. I
don't know. Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is I think a lot of your confusion is from King's kind of inconsistency on this. There is a high speech and a low speech in Midworld, and we like what those words are and what they are as far as like our residents of New York saying in that regard. I think, yes, you are right. We were specifically told earlier that like, it's weird that we can just understand these people because I know they're not speaking English, but I can just understand them. But also, it's like at times it seemed like high speech is just English. And at times it hasn't. So I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies here, but I think just it's the language, and there's Spanish there too. And you just go, cause it's a Western setting, and a lot of Westerns are very influenced by Hispanic culture for sure.
But it's a Western setting, but why would they? But okay. And then I remembered that they have the rain in Spain rhyme. So clearly we know that there's connections between these worlds. Like, I know it's a bit silly to get hung up on this because it's like, all right, look, like we know there are doorways between the worlds. We know there are thinnies. So it's entirely possible that like these civilizations have contact with literal English speaking and Spanish speaking parts of Earth, or maybe people even travel between the worlds and bring the languages with them. It's just, like you pointed out, the weirdness to me was like, wait a minute, I thought it was like specifically said that they're not speaking English. So I don't know.
Yeah, I wish I had a clear answer for you there. I don't. It's possible that somewhere in the depths of this world there is a clear answer, but if so, I don't know it. So if someone out there knows the clear, obvious answer to this, please let us know. But right now I'm going with it's just kind of inconsistent, which is fine.
Sounds good.
Fine. So Susan, not for the first time, but for the most clear time, I think, sees the arrangement with Thorin for exactly what it is. Whoring, she says, sex in exchange for money and gifts. And in this case, the gifts are simply returned property in her view, stuff that was already hers being graciously given back to her. And she's really, really not happy about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of this chapter is basically Susan kind of mentally setting the table for her decision to completely break with her contract, just kind of corralling all of her arguments and grievances.
Yeah, I like that. And then I think the thing that does it at the end is just this horrible, awful experience that she's running from, and she runs into Roland's arms. Yeah. So Susan heads off to the blacksmith to fix Felicia's shoes because, of course, Mayor Thorne can't shoe a horse correctly. This is actually a character, the blacksmith, that we haven't met before, but I really do like what King does with him, Matt, because he sets up this guy and really draws our attention to his newfound success, right? He's indifferent to the fact that Susan doesn't have money to pay for the shoes. He's like, I'll put it on your tab. It'll be fine. It's like, so he doesn't really need the money. His shop looks new. All like the barn is perfectly thatched over. There are no holes in his roof. And there's all these evidence of this newfound success. And Susan just kind of shrugs some of this off as just like part of being in the mayor's favor, like that he's just being nicer to her because of that. But I mean, we do find out the real reason a bit later in the next chapter. But I'm curious if any alarm bells were set off for you. Did this kind of sly setup work for you the way I think King wanted it to?
I think so. Honestly, if it did, it was a very kind of transient thought of just like, okay, this guy's probably in on the conspiracy, whatever this conspiracy is that we're not really sure about yet. And then I just it kind of slipped from my mind because it's clearly just a bit of a breadcrumb, but I didn't know what to make of it. Yeah. So
I like it though, because it's like when Susan and Roland discover the tankers with their fresh set of wheels underneath it, both of them have something to contribute to the putting the pieces together, right? Like Roland's got all his stuff, and then Susan's like, yes, this kind of makes sense why the blacksmith was so indifferent to my money, why everything looks so clean and polished and new in his shop, because he just completed an extremely large order and has a shit ton of money from it. Yeah.
Yep.
And it gets Susan, like, I like that this is not just like Susan like following along with Roland and being taught from Roland. It's a lot of that, but she does have stuff to contribute as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we really talked about this specifically, but she is more the main character of this story than Roland is. I feel. I mean, Roland. It just makes sense to me that this is her world, and so she needs to have agency within it, and so giving her things like that to do to keep her busy and to keep her central are actually pretty important.
Yeah, totally. So while on her way back, Susan is bumped into by Richard Stockworth, a.k.a. Elaine, who it turns out slips her a note from Roland saying that they need to meet again, that he'd like her to lead him through Sitgo. Susan really wrestles with this decision, Matt, and it's this wrestling that I think leads to the primary conflict of this week's reading, which is like honor or love, this kind of thing. And I love this wonderful line here. I think it's so wonderful. All she wanted stood against all she believed of honor, and her mind roared with conflict. All around, like a rising wind around an unstable house, she felt the idea of Ka growing. Yet to give over one's honor for that reason was so easy, wasn't it? To excuse the fall of virtue by invoking all-powerful Ka. It was soft thinking. You burnt Roland. Like, this is literally like taking shots at Roland's behavior through this series so far. That exact kind of thinking.
Soft thinking, Roland. Yeah. I mean, her attitude toward Ka is obviously very different from his. Like she doesn't just accept that Ka will do with her as it wills. Like I think that in a sense, even if she does end up going down the path that Ka has chosen, which I think she will sort of do so defiantly and having struggled and not really, just going sort of thoughtlessly the way Roland tends to. And I think this is really interesting because it sort of, to me, potentially hints at something really interesting about Ka, because Susan dies. Ka leads her to her death. And I'm like, so is that because she fought it so hard? She kind of showed herself to be an unwilling tool. And, conversely, does Roland continue to conveniently notice invisible booby traps and have his enemy's guns jam randomly because he has made himself this willing servant, this willing slave to Ka, and he never really fights it? Yeah,
I mean, that's interesting. I feel like by the end of this week's reading, Susan has, submitted herself to Ka. Like the act of having sex with Roland and embracing the love between them is her basically saying, okay, you win. Like I will not stand in your way anymore.
Yeah.
You have won me over. And so it seems like if that is what leads to her death, then it seems like that's doing what Ka wanted her to do in the first place, right? Like, it's very interesting. And I mean, the thing that I find actually the most interesting about it is that like Ka as a term, as a concept, is referenced almost entirely from Susan's, right? Like Roland, young Roland, even when we're in his head, rarely thinks about Ka, rarely mentions Ka. I think he's done it like one or two times, but like every deep dive, like struggle with or exploration of has come from Susan in this story, which is very different from the Roland we see in the future or the present. Yeah.
Right. I mean, she's the one talking about like the idea of Ka rising around her like a torrent, and Roland is just kind of like staring off into the distance and fantasizing.
Yeah, right.
He's not struggling with this on a metaphysical level the way she is.
And I think.
Yeah, I mean
sorry,
that's.
Go ahead. No,
go
you
ahead.
go ahead.
I mean, like you point out, I think, a valid kind of ambiguity, which is like, okay, so either under this framework that I'm trying to put together, either Ka is like punishing Susan for holding out so long and fighting it by leading her to her death, or Ka willed that she die the whole time. That was the point. The point is to give Roland a tragic backstory so that Roland can then be a tool of Ka, basically. Sure. I mean, in which case Ka just kills people sometimes, which I guess has to be true because, like, we've remarked many times, I think, that like Ka just kind of means fate. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be good.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's also the idea that if Susan and Roland getting together is the will of Ka, then we've just kind of seen that it's impossible to resist it, right? Or are they just using this once again as an excuse to invoke a reason to get rid of their virtue, right? Like to give over one's honor because I have no choice, right? Like, is this just an excuse or is this the will of Ka actually? And we don't really know the answer to that, but it's so interesting. And again, I just find like it kind of shows us that Roland was not this person at this age, right? He was not this person that thought about these things, that thought of himself as the slave, that thought of himself as ruled by this force. He doesn't really think about it that much. He doesn't really talk about it that much. Even like, and it's not like he doesn't have the opportunity to, because we're seeing through Susan that there is plenty of opportunity to talk about fate and destiny when it comes to these two forces that seem like linked beyond their ability to control it, and yet it all comes from Susan. So maybe he learns it from her or through her.
Maybe. Yeah, I was wondering because like there's a point a bit later where she senses Rhea spying on them, and he just like kind of dismisses it. Whereas I feel like present day Roland would be like, oh, you sent something? Okay, we're being spied on by a witch, definitely. Like he's way wiser to this kind of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting idea that he might learn it from her, or at least kind of start going down that path due to this interaction with her. Yeah,
I mean, and I think the other thing we always have to consider is the fact that within our framing of a story within a story, it's Roland telling all of this. So is this what was really going through Susan's mind, or is he putting this on her? And I don't know, because like this certainly lines up with the way he feels about Ka in the present. So is he? We don't know. I don't think so, because I think like the magic of the story is that he's not, that he just, it's like he just knows it all because the story wants to be told that way. But I don't know.
I got the sense that King is not playing a unreliable narrator shell game with us. That this is actually the true story.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I would go so far as to say unreliable narrator, but just like everything is still being said. Everything that is still being said is influenced by Roland's perspective, by present day Roland's perspective as he relays the information, which is not unreliable. Just like
Just it's a narrator.
Yeah. Every narrator has a perspective, right? And Roland is a narrator. Yeah. Anyway, I think at the end of this, Susan basically decides, I can't control Ka. I have no control over that. All I can do is control my actions. And so I'm going to keep my oath. That's what she says. And she's going to do it. Good for you, Susan. But we see that it's Sand Day now, which is interesting, Matt. Why? They just kind of throw this at us. It's not Sunday. It's Sand Day.
I don't know. Did we get another day name in here? Because I
think so.
I thought we did, and I forgot what it was now. But yeah, it's funny because it's similar but not the same.
But Susan heads into town to deliver her message to Roland, and she's going to actually do so through Cuthbert. So we have this wonderful interaction between Susan and Cuthbert, and I love how he is absolutely blown away by her staggering beauty here. Like the way he describes this, Cuthbert wasn't surprised that Roland was smitten with her. She was nothing short of breathtaking, even dressed in jeans and a farm shirt. Her hair was tied back with a series of rough rawhide hanks, and she had eyes of the brightest gray Cuthbert had ever seen. Cuthbert thought it was wonderful that Roland had been able to continue with any aspect of his life at all, even down to the washing of his teeth. Certainly she came with a cure for Cuthbert. Sentimental thoughts of his mother disappeared in an instant. So yeah, he's thinking about his mom and missing home, and then he sees Susan and is just like blown away by her beauty. And so here's my question to you. Do we have some potential for some future jealousy here in this relationship?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sure, there's potential. I mean, I think that among friends, like a man can objectively note that his friend's girl is extremely attractive and then just kind of not allow himself to go any further. And it seems to me that Cuthbert is, I don't know, kind of a true friend type dude. I could be entirely wrong. Maybe this is a source of jealousy, but that wasn't the vibe I got. The vibe that I got was just like, yeah, he just notices that she's stunning and then kind of goes on with his day probably. But I mean, you're definitely right that King is leaving himself this option, I guess, of like maybe there is this lingering tension.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of set up a tension, an inter-quartet tension here, like with the way Roland has been behaving and the way that you are reacting to the way it's been behaving. But it's interesting that like they're so reverential to him that they're so hesitant to call him on his stuff. That like even in this next section where Elaine and Cuthbert see the note that Susan has left Roland, which is basically like, no, I'm not going to help you. And he's like, no, I'm going to wait. We're going to wait for her. And they're just like, Roland, come on. Like, we don't have time to wait. And he's like, they push back on him, but not like in like a direct kind of conflict. So it's very interesting. Like we talked about this with the quartet in the present day, right? That they just don't have very much interpersonal conflict. Like it's if they do, it's always like light and solved rather quickly. And it seems to be the same with the Roland's old quartet as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like there is a degree of sort of enabling happening, I guess, because they do. I don't know how to frame it exactly. I really think it's interesting though, because like we have these moments where, you know, they will sort of prod Roland to do the right thing, but never to the point of maybe saying straight out what they are thinking of, you know. I like, okay, so maybe what I'm trying to grasp at is like, I feel like if a similar situation were to arise in the modern day quartet with the significantly older quartet members, then like either Eddie or Susanna would be like, hey, Roland, I noticed that you seem to be completely besotted with this woman, and it seems to be undermining your decision making, and I think we should have a frank conversation about this. And like, because like they're all adults and they can have conflicts like that and then like have the conversation and resolve it. And this, I guess, just strikes me as a much more like young teenager thing where it's like, oh, I don't really know how to have awkward conversations like that, so I'm just going to kind of awkwardly poke at it and then let it continue to become a worse problem.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's a very good point, that this is kind of just a reflection of how young these kids are. Yeah. either way, Roland gets the message that Susan will not be helping them. And then we get this wonderful interaction where I think we characterize Elaine a little bit more. At last, Elaine spoke almost timidly. "And now, Roland, shall we have a hunt out there at the oil patch without her?" Cuthbert admired that. Upon first meeting him, many people dismissed Elaine Johns as something of a dullard. That was far from the truth. Now, in a diplomatic way Cuthbert could never have matched, he had pointed out that Roland's unhappy first experience with love did not change their responsibilities, and Roland responded, raising himself off the saddle horn and sitting up straight. It's such a, I talked to you about how Elaine is a character that just was not clear in my mind going into this deep reading. And so I've just been delighted learning more about him. And we see here that he's political. He's diplomatic. He's diplomatic in the way that we've seen Roland in the present be. And I really love it.
Yeah, we talked about how Cuthbert is somewhat analogous, though certainly not identical, to Eddie. And I think it's interesting to consider whether Elaine is somewhat analogous to Susanna. Susanna is definitely a big one for soberly watching and thinking and calculating and then making some incisive observation or some careful action, particularly regarding other people's mental states, actually. So it kind of makes sense to make that parallel between the two.
Yeah.
I was going to be like, on the other hand, Elaine has nothing like the inner Detta Walker. But then I was like, well, Elaine does have like the touch. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, Susanna kind of has a lot of psychic stuff going on too. So there's maybe another sort of parallel between those two characters.
Sure. I mean, regardless of whether that second parallel holds up to scrutiny, I think I like the first one a lot, that Susanna is this kind of, Elaine is the quieter character, right? He's quiet, he's reserved, he's kind of just watching, and he points stuff out, and he does it in a diplomatic way, and I think that is absolutely true of Susanna. Sorry.
Yeah.
But Roland ignores his responsibility here, Matt. He says that they're going to wait and hope that Susan changes her mind. A choice that, as we talked about, kind of confounds his mates, especially after they learned from Roland that DePape is probably out there following their back trail and might be heading back into town knowing all about them. Roland actually cites court's advice as to why they're not going to rush in here. But I don't know. Do you buy it?
I think that Roland is not lying to his friends, but I think he's deluding himself. I do think that he's love-addled, but love-addled in a distinctly Roland way, sort of like how he will do these incredibly terrible things for the tower while managing to avoid ever consciously looking at the choices. So it's like he's unreflective and plotting in love, just as he is in pursuit of the tower.
Yeah. No, I love that everything has to go through Susan. Like, and as we've said before, like his desire to involve her in this as a pretense for them being together is putting her in harm's way. It's involving her in the danger. And you could argue that she's already kind of involved in the danger, what with her contract with Mayor Thorin, but like now she knows all the secrets as well, or she will by the end of this week at least.
Yeah, and I don't think, again, just to clarify, like I don't think he's conniving to involve her. I think that he is not thinking straight. I think that he is, like I love how you just said that everything goes through Susan. Like how do I solve this problem except somehow Susan is involved?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like she even says to him here, Roland, I am not the best person to lead you through the oil patch. I've been here like once and I don't know my way around this place. And he's like, no, you're the best. You're the best. I agree with you. I don't think there's anything malicious or conniving in anything that he's doing, but yeah, he's coming up with reasons constantly for why Susan needs to be the one. And it always makes perfect sense in his head, and his friends are just like, I don't know, Roland. He's like, no. Yeah. Like I love with the certainty with which he speaks, where he says, I speak with my father's voice on this, right? Like it's like the power of that. It's like, no, I'm saying this with all my authority. Like this is the right move. And they're kind of just completely cowed by that. Like they're not going to talk back to that. I think they internally, like, we're in Cuthbert's head, and I think he internally like doubts it. Is like, I'm not sure if I believe that. I'm not sure if you have enough in your head to be aware of which voice you're speaking with, I think is what he says, or something like that, which is perfect. But again, he does not call him out like verbally about that. Yeah.
Which is, again, that's so interesting because like, I feel like Eddie for example, like big difference between Eddie and Cuthbert is that Eddie would have like that thought would have just been out of his mouth before he was even aware of having it. You know?
Yeah. I think they are similar for sure, but yeah, I mean, I think Cuthbert talks constantly, but he also is reverential to Roland in a way that Eddie isn't, or is at times, but not at other times. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that Eddie is capable of seeing Roland's flaws in particular ways, and Cuthbert has not seen those flaws yet.
Right.
So.
I mean, Eddie had Henry, and Cuthbert only had Roland, right?
Oh, yeah, I like that. Good point.
So yeah, there's after this point, Elaine basically gives his "I wish the ring had never come to us" speech, where he says, "I wish our fathers hadn't sent us here. I wish none of this had happened." And Roland is Gandalf here and says, they wouldn't have sent us, not my father, not yours, if they'd known what we find here," Roland said. "But now we found it, and now we're for it. Yes?" Elaine and Cuthbert nodded. They were for it, all right. There no longer seemed to be any doubt of that. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. King's always so good at making the stakes clear. I think that's what he's doing here. I think that it's very easy for the stakes to get lost when we're like 3 deep into storytelling flashbacks and there's like a mystery and all this stuff is going on. But you know, King knows that it's complicated, and so he knows like, okay, bring it home to the stakes. We've got our 3 boys. They're in danger. They need to pull together, and they need to solve the mystery, which is going to threaten their civilization and so forth.
Yeah, and they're admitting here that they are not the ones that should be doing this. That if anyone back in Gilead knew what was going on here, or even had an inkling of what was going on here, there would have been 100 people they would have sent before these 3 boys. But circumstance, Ka, whatever you want to call it, has led to them being here now, and there's no choice. They can't run away. They can't leave. They have to fight. They have to go forward. The only way is forward. And I love that. Yeah, I think you're right that it does reframe our stakes very clearly as we kind of like weave this complicated tale of like Susan and hidden oil and extra horses and all this stuff going on, and who is in on this and who isn't. Yeah, it's pretty complicated. So the next day, Shimi proves Roland right for waiting as he comes and delivers a message to them at the Traveler's Rest. We're actually in Shimi's point of view here, Matt, and we get some more just really delightful stuff from him. First, he calls the Katet the Little Coffin Hunters, which is just wonderful. And I love Cuthbert's like, "Hey, please don't do that." And then as he hands over the note from Susan, where he describes it as the seeds that we had planted on the drop last time, Roland's eyes blazed so fiercely that Shimi stumbled back a step. He gave his sombrero a quick tug, turned and hurried back to the safety of his flowers. He liked Will Dearborn and Will's friends, especially Mr. Arthur Heath, who sometimes said things that made Shimi laugh fit to split. But in that moment, he saw something in Will Sye's eyes that frightened him badly. In that instant, he understood that Will was as much a killer as the one in the cloak, or the one who had wanted Shimi to lick his boots clean, or that old white-haired Jonas with the trembly voice. As bad as them, or even worse.
That's so great. It's really one of my favorite things about this book, about this series, honestly, is that like our protagonist has this side to him that's so dark that like the kind of innocent characters recognize it as just like bad.
Yeah.
Like just it's bad. He's got a darkness, you know. I keep going back to the wording that Scott Wampler used when he guested with us a few weeks ago. He called Roland a hard case. And I was like, that's the perfect description for what Roland is. Even when he's a kid, he's a hard case. Yeah. But the thing about him is he's, of course, also a romantic. But like those are that's what makes him a compelling character, I think, is he has those 2 sides that are in conflict.
Yeah. I mean, I think I liked what you said there about like the innocent, because I think we've talked about Shimi as a character who we're like, he's this kind of, through no fault of his own, this powerless character in this world who we can observe the good and bad of people and how they treat him. And Roland treats him very well, right? Like all three of the little coffin hunters treat him very well. They're kind to him. But yeah, when you have this character you framed as like the kid who has really never done anything wrong, and it's just life has just shat on him, and then through his perspective we see this side of Roland, as bad of them or even worse is like my favorite part of that. Like we have talked so much about how awful DePape is, right? Like how like we have a whole discussion question based off the fact that I thought it was gross to be in his point of view and how it made everything gross. And yet Shimi, our innocent, looks at this guy and sees the potential for even worse than them. And I think like, while I love Roland, I think that's true, right? I mean, from this point forward, we know he will kill countless people. We know he will let a child fall to his death for the sake of this tower. Like he's going to make these choices again and again. And so there is some truth that Shimi saw. This is not just like the fear of a kid looking at these people. This is truth.
I mean, like one thing, I mean, this is gonna be pretty harsh, but I think it's true, is that like, I think that DePape would totally let a kid fall into a crevasse, you know, to get a single, quarter.
Sure, sure.
But maybe not a kid that he liked.
Yeah, fair.
Or maybe not a kid that he loved, Like, Roland loved Jake. And then when it came time, he just was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna decide I don't love you anymore.
I don't have a choice. It doesn't matter if I love you or not. I don't have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe we're seeing right now where that attitude came from, right? It doesn't matter if I love you. I don't have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's something to be said about the idea of like a person who is evil and nasty and monstrous, but at least like is upfront about that, is somehow not as bad as a person who is deceptive in that regard, who like is convinces you, but also convinces themselves that they're not that way, while making those same choices. Yeah.
I think later I'm going to talk about this again, actually, but I for some reason my mind keeps going back to the specific line when the man in black basically makes it clear to Roland that he's only going to let himself be caught if Jake doesn't make it out of the cave. And the specific wording is that like there's an uncoupling in Roland's mind. And I think that's such a horrifying turn of phrase, because it's like he cared so much about this kid. This kid eventually goes on to become part of his quartet, and it's like obviously a person who he cares about a lot and is important to him, and he does this uncoupling in his mind. He's like deciding it's a horrible thing, right? It's like I don't know. There's something about it that's even worse than just being like kind of a simple, straightforward monster. I agree.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a horrifying idea that you could just uncouple from something that you care about.
Yeah, no, totally agree. That word choice is there, like that's what jumped out at me on my Gunslinger read. That was horrifying. It was horrifying. And again, it's not his fault. It's not his fault. He has no control over it.
It's just Kyle.
Whatever, Roland. Anyway, so the note from Shimi is from Susan, of course, and she says she'll meet him alone at the Orange Grove near the Sitco tonight. And so our boy is very excited. And I love this wonderful description that King has as Roland wanders into that orange grove. As the boy wandered along one of the rows, listening to the somehow skeletal sounds from the oil patch to the north, squealing pistons, grinding gears, thudding drive shafts, he was struck by deep homesickness. It was the fragile fragrance of orange blossoms, a bright runner laid over the dark stench of oil, that brought it on. This toy grove was nothing like the great apple orchards of New Canaan, except somehow it was. There was the same feeling of dignity and civilization here, of much time devoted to something not strictly necessary, and in this case he suspected not very useful either. Oranges grown this far north of the warm latitudes were probably almost as sour as lemons. Still, when the breeze stirred the trees, the smell made him think of Gilead with bitter longing, and for the first time he considered the possibility that he might never see home again, that he had become as much a wanderer as old Peddler Moon in the sky. Oh, I love this. I love this.
Yeah. It's great writing. It also really got my mind going because, I mean, King has really talked a lot about this theme of civilization and its opposite, actually. And, you know, I love this language here, sort of linking the idea of civilization with, the, you know, quote, much time devoted to things, to something not strictly necessary.
Yeah.
I think that's such a great description of what civilization is. And it seems like civilization is the thing that is leaving Midworld, right?
Yeah.
As the world moves on, this is what is leaving. The you know, all that's left seems to be the animal side of humanity, the zero-sum competition over resources, you know, any ability to spend time on stuff that isn't strictly necessary kind of evaporates, and it's just, you know, that's what the apocalypse is, actually.
Yeah. I love that.
I think it goes without saying that King has thought a lot about apocalypse scenarios. I mean, he wrote an apocalypse book between this book and the previous book. And these books, of course, sort of are apocalypse books. But I think like this passage is the closest that he's come to just kind of outright stating his thesis on the matter. It's about civilization.
Yeah. No, I love that.
I also wanted to go in a similar direction, but like last week we talked a little bit about Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, and how the text of this book specifically references the title of that book in a way that I found like obviously like he did it intentionally. And what's interesting, of course, is that McCarthy is also known for his own post-apocalyptic book, The Road, which people may have read or may have seen the movie of. And of course, Blood Meridian is a kind of apocalypse, actually. It's sort of an apocalypse for the native peoples of the United States. But I like this passage and this kind of line of thought really got me going, because I was like, well, Cormac McCarthy has very similar thesis about civilization, actually. I think that I would paraphrase Cormac McCarthy's stance on civilization as being like, civilization is a fragile thing. It's in the hands of the people who are willing to protect this sort of unpractical ideal through really bad times, even if it costs them a lot to do so. And in this viewing, civilization is a kind of romantic ideal, in much the same way that Roland is kind of a romantic character, where, you know, there's this streak of kind of impracticality centered around beauty that exists at the core of this character that is really a fundamentally pragmatic character.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I really love that. That's great. Well done.
Cool.
I want to go reread The Road now and compare it to The Stand, which is not the same type of book at all, but...
Yeah, Cormac McCarthy podcast next, I guess.
Yeah, let's do it. McCarthy Slingers.
McCarthyism.
Yes. maybe not a good pick. So as soon as Susan arrives at the Orange Grove, Roland begins kissing her as if they're both on fire. And for the first time since the opening of the story, we cut to Rhea of the Coos, who is watching the two of them through her pink crystal ball, a ball which appears to be literally sucking the life from her, Matt. Like, this is not just, like, when we first saw her use the ball, it kind of brought back her youth temporarily, but now it's gone beyond that and is just sucking her life out of her. And yet she doesn't care.
Yeah, I wasn't even clear if she was aware of it, or like she's getting so much like pleasure out of it that it doesn't matter, I guess.
Yeah, it didn't seem like she is, no. The two do manage to get their passions under control and stop themselves before things get too sexy. And Roland finally comes partially clean with Susan, not telling her his name, but why he is here, really. Not to investigate some plot or because he was drinking too much, but just to be put out of the way, and it's just some dumb luck. Then they discuss the game of castles that he and the Big Coffin Boys are now playing with each other, both waiting, neither wanting to make the first move. And I love this because... first of all, that's exactly what's happening here, and that's just the way King is managing tension. But also this kind of back and forth between Susan and Roland, both kind of waiting, both hesitating to make the first move type of thing, is exactly what's the game that they've been playing with each other.
Yeah, that's true. There's a tension in both scenarios. Of course, in this case, they kind of want the other person to make the first move and just kind of rip off the Band-Aid. I
mean, I would say that that's what Roland wants in the situation with the Big Coffin Hunters as well. Like he would love if Jonas made the first move, because then he's exposed and they can counteract that.
True. Yeah.
So the two head into Sitco, seeing the 19 oil wells still pumping and the candle a gas pipe that it uses. That's what they use to power the fridge that they serve the ice with. We see that it's the gas pump. I love my favorite part about this whole section, Matt, is the little moments where they're like trying to get work done, but they just can't help but be all over each other. Like they're talking about the electrified fence. And Susan says, when there's electricity, some went through here. She paused, then added shyly, it's how I feel when you touch me.
Yeah.
I think we've been a bit hard on poor doomed Roland and Susan, Matt, because of that aforementioned doom. But I do find the two of them just delightful, right? It's just like this, it's this cute, it's this adorable and like deeply passionate young love between these two people. I think King has really managed to capture these these small moments perfectly. Like every time they touch each other incidentally or on purpose, like there's just like a spark is lit in them. Like it's like, I don't know if you remember being young and liking someone, but like where you're just like trying to initiate physical contact, and it's like even like the brushing of like a pinky it's like it's just like both of you are paying so much attention to every little bit and every little touch, but not like directly acknowledging that those things are happening. It's really wonderful.
Of course. I mean, I think if I don't mean to be that hard on them. If I am being hard on them, it's probably coming from a place of like connecting to it too much and being like, oh, this is it's too, I'm sort of being hard on, 16-year-old me more than I'm being hard on them.
Sure.
So
yeah. I don't think we're being that hard on them. I just think like we've been doing a lot of Romeo and Juliet comparisons, right? And that's like, you dumb fucking kids, stop it. Which is, I mean, I still feel that, but I am comfortable sitting in my chair here and saying, you dumb kids, stop it, while also being like, yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, right. I think that last week I said something along the lines of like, I don't think it's like inherently bad. I don't think like young love is inherently a bad thing. But it's definitely I don't know what the right word is. It's like it's not going to end up the way they want it to, no matter what, like even under the best case scenario. So there's a lot of delusion happening. There's a lot of self-delusion and wishful thinking happening, which is just part and parcel with it. And so that is just what it is. Yeah.
And I think all of this kind of comes from the choice that King made to tell us the ending of the story at the beginning. We knew going into the story not exactly, but we knew what was going to happen. Susan is dead. Roland is still not over her death. And so, every interaction, every bit we see is colored with knowledge of the future. So I think if King wanted to write just a great, love story with nothing to criticize that has a shocking ending, he could have done that. But that's not what he chose to do here. He chose to let us know exactly how it goes. And so we see every one of these interactions knowing that it leads to their doom. And so, we react to that because we're like, oh, God, no, don't do that. But also, I love you guys and I want you to bang.
Yeah. Yep.
So eventually they find the secret that DePape and Reynolds worked so hard to cover really easily, actually. I think they did a shitty job. Roland spots some tracks heading into the forest, and Susan is so impressed with Roland's tracking ability that she asks him once again, "Who are you?" And he finally reveals his name to her. And then they kiss once again, and that kiss blooms into something more. And Susan Delgado then finally says, okay, I succumb to Ka. So Roland's name, we know him now, Roland. Susan knows Roland. We got that. We knew that was going to happen, and now it happened. Yeah.
That was a satisfying moment, I think.
But then something really interesting happens, Matt. In the middle of this kiss, she wants to tell him, she basically says she's going to succumb to Ka and tell him she loves him, and she opens her mouth to tell him so, and then a queer but utterly persuasive sensation enfolded her. They were being watched. It was ridiculous, but it was there. She even felt she knew who was watching. She stepped back from Roland, her booted heels rocking unsteadily on half-eroded oxen tracks. "Get out, ye old bitch," she breathed. "If ye be spying on us in some way, I know not how. Get thee gone." And Rhea of the Coos is blown back, and the magical pink ball stops working. How did this happen, Matt? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's the Shinnin.
It's the Shinnin.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I definitely felt like there was something Ka related here, because she's going to tell him, let's get down, and then this supernatural sense comes over her, and it interrupts her, it stops her, and I think if she had said it right here, it might have happened. So it's almost like Ka or something intervened in this moment to stop it. Of course, all that ended up accomplishing was to postpone it until I don't actually remember, a bit later, a few days later, I guess. But it is interesting how it just, the supernatural sort of premonition intervenes and effectively stops her from saying that now.
Yeah. It's interesting because we have to compare it to the moment where this happens again, later when they're getting dirty. Susan does not sense anything. It's actually Roland who senses something this time. He just doesn't say anything. Because like his reaction to this is basically like, nah, you're probably just making that up.
Which is funny.
And then he feels something very briefly later and just doesn't say anything. And we know that Rhea was watching them once again. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like it's not clearly a gift that she's blessed with, where every time Rhea is looking at her, she will sense it. It is this specific time and only this specific time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, well, see, my feeling was that Rhea was watching her this time and is watching Roland the other time.
It could be. Yeah.
And that's maybe an overly literal interpretation, but yeah, it's interesting.
Sure.
I don't know.
But eventually they find the tankers, 14 of them filled up with oil and equipped with brand new wheels for transport created by the local blacksmith. Roland estimates that Farson has some machines that need the oil to run, and they're coming to get them. We got a little bit of the mystery solved here, Matt. We actually learned that's what was in the note that last week's reading left off on, was that Farson has split off a division of his army and is coming east, coming to Hambry, it seems, and this is what they're coming to get, this oil. That's why they have the oxen there to pull the carts. We still really don't know like what's up with the horses, right?
Yeah, there's still gaps for sure. Yeah. I do wonder again if the Thinny is going to come into play, because like that would kind of answer a lot of questions if it was a portal to something that they need. Like they have the oil, maybe the machines they need are beyond the Thinny, and that's involved somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you do.
I do. I just like to say I don't like making you feel like you're out there all alone. So sometimes I just pretend like I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I appreciate that we have these conversations about Ka, and I'm like, does he actually know exactly how Ka works perfectly, and he's just pretending to think that it's mysterious, or are we having an actual conversation? And it's really enjoyable that I have no idea and don't answer.
Of course I'm not going to answer that. Whoa, that would be boring.
Obviously.
So having completed their mission, the two return to the Orange Grove. And I love how King describes this. They return there lovers in all but the most physical sense. Like the only thing they haven't done yet is hooked up.
Yeah.
And they're trying to decide what to do now. And I love this section here. Who can remember the pangs and sweetness of those early years? We remember our first real love no more clearly than the illusions that caused us to rave during a high fever. On that night, beneath that fading moon, Roland Deschain and Susan Delgado were nearly torn apart by their desire for each other. They floundered for what was right and ached with feelings that were both desperate and deep. All of which is to say they stepped toward each other, stepped back, looked into each other's eyes with a kind of helpless fascination, stepped forward again, and stopped. I love this because this almost breaks the form of our narrative, right? Like, who can remember the pangs and sweetness of those early years? That is the narrator, like, talking to us, not just relaying information, but like talking to us in a very specific way that I don't think Roland has done in this story very much.
Yeah, and it really does seem like the voice of the adult Roland.
Yeah.
Speaking here. It almost sounds like him. It almost sounds like the way he would word this, although it also sounds like Stephen King, of course. One thing I like about fantasy and genre fiction is that you can take these very relatable human feelings, like this young love that we're witnessing here, and then weave through it this thread of the supernatural in the form of Ka, because like Ka is very much like young love or just love in general, in that it's exerting this kind of push and pull under the surface, and it's sort of almost like a supernatural fantasy kind of tropey way of talking about the ideas of love and maybe also addiction. Sort of that pink versus red love that we were talking about before.
Sure. Yeah, I love that, because you're absolutely right. Like, when you are young and in love, you feel like you have no control. Like, right? Like, you feel like that this is all there is, and there's nothing else, and this is it. Like, I remember being in love, and I'm still in love. I love my wife very much, but I remember being a teenager in love. I don't even know if it was really love, but in love with a girl, and I was like, there's no one else. There's no one else. There's nothing else. This is all there is each other. All there is this feeling between us. That's it. Nothing else in the world. And if we don't get, and we have no more say in this than anything else. And yeah, I mean, it's you're absolutely right that Ka works as like a perfect metaphor for that feeling. And so I love how King's twisting those, and I love that. I love it. I never thought of it that way, but I really like it.
Yeah, right. It's man, I don't know. I don't know what else to say exactly, but I think that I like this track that we're on of sort of tracking the idea, the intertwined nature of Ka and love, and whether like, the white and the rose and these different symbols that we have, how they interact and what they mean. Yeah. I'm super keen to figure out what is actually going on with all of these symbols, which is interesting because it's not like the book's ever going to tell us what the symbol means. It's just, hopefully it will become more and more clear what a symbol means as you continue to see the symbol being used. Right.
Or you'll have at least more data points to add to your interpretation of what the symbol means.
Yeah.
So finally, caught between their love and responsibility, Susan fully gives in and says, "If you love me, then love me. Make me break my promise." But Roland says no and turns her down, and Susan rides off into the night, furious at him once again. We then cut back to Roland and see why he did this, and despite all the words nearly tearing him apart, he recognizes how dangerous this is, the danger in the two of them being together in this incredibly dangerous place, and he can't ignore that danger. It's too much for him, and so he holds back, which is just kind of incredibly adult of him, right?
Yeah. For now.
Yeah. But to seal, I love that the chapter ends here on this thing that is like meant to like make abundantly clear what this danger is, right? Because he hesitates because he feels this overwhelming sense of danger in this place, and doing this just adds more. And then as he's riding back, he spots a lone man on horseback arriving into the town at 3 a.m. and he recognizes him as DePape, who is now back in Hambry with the information that he gathered. So we know, the things are about to, that tension is twisting once again. And so it's like validating Roland's feeling of danger.
True. Although that doesn't come into play at all in the next chapter, which if anything just makes us even more anxious because we're just waiting for that shoe to drop.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jonas is smart, right? I think that proves without a doubt that Jonas is very clever and that he is playing a long game. And he knows he's playing castles just as much as Roland does, and he doesn't want to be he has information about them now. He doesn't want to be the first one to reveal this information, or he wants to hold it until he can reveal it at the most opportune time.
Yeah. I mean, for all we know, like, I guess that's a great point. It's like, it's almost worse that nothing comes of it because you just know that Jonas has put all sorts of contingencies into motion based on this information that our characters have no idea about. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, definitely. So then we head into chapter 10, Bird and Bear and Hare and Fish. We cut to 2 weeks later on the most important day of Susan Delgado's life, the day upon which her life turned like a stone upon a pivot. Ka finally came and blew her away, house and barn and all. It began with someone at the door. I love this opening, Matt. Like, this just setting the stage for what is going to be the most important chapter of this entire part two, rather. Susan, like, this is the chapter on which everything is going to turn.
Yeah, again, it's funny because Ka here is again portrayed as something that's just going to have its way regardless of whether you fight it. It makes me wonder if like fighting it only makes it stronger.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's like when you get swept up in a tornado, if you're just unconscious, you're not all tightened up because you're not resisting what's happening.
True.
And you land more gently.
Of course, one thing that struck me here is we have a lot of Wizard of Oz imagery in the book in general. We've talked about it many times. Susan or Susan's father have kind of described Ka as a wind. And I thought this phrasing of it blew her away, house and barn and all, really kind of reminded me of Dorothy being blown away in her house up into the tornado.
That's great. I love it. So Susan has to rush out to the mayor's house because there's a problem with one of her reaping dresses. It was torn apart by the mayor's dog. King does the kind of fractured storytelling once again, where Susan goes there happy but returns angry, and we see Susan returning through Cordelia's eyes. She recognizes that something is wrong with her, but we only learn the truth of what happened at the mayor's house after she kind of coaxes it out of Susan. Which again, like we could have just cut to Susan experiencing this firsthand, but instead we're having Susan relay the story of it to her aunt, which is something that King does over and over and over again, right? Like it really makes it seem just how important the idea of storytelling is in this book, right? Because people are constantly telling each other the stories that they've experienced, and that's what we're seeing them through. Really interesting
I love
stuff.
That. Yeah.
So while she was standing there trying on a new dress, Mayor Thorne came up behind her and he assaults her, Matt. He fondles her and he dry humps her to completion. It's super disgusting. But I want to focus on this in the ways that don't have me focus on the actual act itself, because it's really disgusting. But the ways in which King uses words here to really make it as disgusting as possible. Like just the way he describes Thorin here is just so wonderful. So this is the part that I'm about to read is right after Susan basically said, you can't do this because the witch Rhea told you not to. And he says, balls to her and all witches. His cultured politician's tone had been replaced by an accent as thick as that in the voice of any backcountry farmhand from Ani's Ford. I must have something, a bonbon, aye, so I must. Balls to the witch, I say. Owl shit to her. The smell of tobacco a thick reek around her head. She thought that she would vomit if she had to smell it much longer. Just stand still, girl. Stand still, my temptation. Mind me well. It's so awful. Like, it's just like his accent, he literally starts speaking differently.
Yeah.
There's so,
Yeah. He like turns into this ogre.
Yeah.
I mean, like, God, this is so horrible. And King really just drags us through the whole ordeal in detail, right? He doesn't spare us a moment of this.
Yeah.
And like he's giving us like cleverly evocative descriptions for some of the more gross elements of the process.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh God.
This is Stephen King. I mean, this is like he will set up these horrifying situations, these absolutely some of the most disturbing things I've ever read, but he never blinks from them, right? He doesn't like, and then like fade to black and make it clear that this is what's happening. And like, just, he really dives into it because he wants the reader to see the worst parts of it. He like this is meant to be horrifying. You're not supposed to take any pleasure in this as a reader. You're like, this is monstrous. It's terrible. It's awful. It's the worst. It's the worst of what people do to other people. And he wants you to live in that moment and see it. And he does this again and again and again throughout his stories. And it really, like, I understand why it makes people uncomfortable and turns a lot of people off to King. But I've always respected that he is willing to shine a light on these things that people do all the time and not blink away from them. This is what this is like. This is what this feels like. And this is not something I've ever had to go through. Thank goodness. And it feels gross. It feels disgusting. It's awful. And I love that we get to see that it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think quote that we like to say is that books are empathy machines, and forcing you to consider what this sort of experience is like, I think does give people like, you and me empathy for, not that we don't already have empathy, but it's one thing to have empathy in kind of a vague humanistic sense, and another thing entirely to have imagined in detail what an experience is like, and
Right.
been with a character who you feel related to and feel identified with going through this situation, and it really changes how you see that situation going forward, potentially for the rest of your life, actually. So I agree that it's valuable, I think, actually.
I fault no one who reads this and says, I can't do Stephen King. I can't. I think people have triggers and are made very uncomfortable by certain things. But yeah, I agree there's value to it. I mean, there's a short story that King wrote called The Library Policeman that actually we're going to talk about in our discussion questions. And it is a young boy being raped by a man. And it is the most disturbing thing I've ever read. Like, it is the most uncomfortable, terrible thing I've ever read. But I understand why he did that. Like, I get it, as disturbed and uncomfortable as I am. Like, I get it. This is just what he does. I think a lot of his mission statement and his view on horror is shining a light on things that are happening that nobody talks about.
Sure. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with his whole approach to like what he considers evil to be. It's a genre trope way of talking about very real, very immediate, very meaningful things.
Right. And I think what we'll see, maybe not in this series in particular, but in a lot of Stephen King books, the reason that evil is allowed to flourish is because people keep silent about it. They look away. They don't react. They don't say something. They don't do something. And so I think in his way, he's shining a light on these things.
Yeah, which nicely brings us into our next remark.
Yeah. So Cord's response to this story is unsurprisingly shitty, right? She basically just says, you're exaggerating. You think that never happened to me? Psh. But I think it's really interesting here because I do think there's a tinge of, maybe it's not like regret, but there's some emotion in Cord here after hearing this story. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but look at this passage here. The rage she expected did not come. What did was worse, an expression close to the look of emptiness she had seen on Thorne's face in the mirror. Deed's done, Susan. A smile short-lived and awful nickered an eyelid on her aunt's narrow face. Deed's done. Aye. And so it's not like she's empathizing with Susan here. She's not, but like she's just kind of indifferent to it, and she's just like you can tell it affects her, and she almost is consciously making the decision to not let it affect her, to like zone out. Like we kind of see in her eyes that she's zoning out, and I think that's so powerful.
I think that is what it is. Like I think this world is shitty. I think people like Cord probably have to deal with a bunch of awful injustices, and either directly or just kind of seeing them happen around her. And so people like Cord in this fantasy world, and people like Cord in the real world too, learn to just kind of shut down, to turn off whatever that part of themselves is that is capable of empathy. And this is actually the part that reminded me of Roland's uncoupling. When he realizes he's going to have to sacrifice Jake, he just kind of turns off that old empathy. In Cord's case, I mean, it would be too painful to care about this thing properly, to be humane. It's too painful to exist in this tension between what should be and what is. And so Cord just kind of uncouples. And I think the reason why this reminds Susan of the look on Thorin's face is like Thorin just sort of uncouples from from what he actually did. He kind of, it almost seems like he kind of comes back to his senses. And then he kind of is just like, I can't process the guilt that I should feel about this. So I'm just not gonna.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, I don't want to get into psychology too much, but I think most human beings out there are not just complete unfeeling monsters, and they do terrible things, and the way they live with them is just by separating themselves from the terrible thing they've done. And in this exact kind of uncoupling way. So I think you're absolutely right. Like that's what both of these people are doing to Susan. And it's awful. It's terrible. But I think I love that that's worse to Susan. Like if she had yelled at her, if she had got angry with her, had fought back with her about this, that would have been better. But no, this is just kind of indifference. It's over. It's deed's done. Deed's done. It happened. It's over. No use complaining about it now. It's the worst.
Right. It's like it's a little bit more than indifference, right? Because it's like active indifference. It's I'm trying to make this not matter.
Right. Yeah. And of course, Susan is enraged at this, understandably, and she flees from her house and rides out to her secret hiding spot. Roland finds her there because, of course, he does, because he is just constantly sitting up on this area that has a good view of Susan's house, just all day, every day. That's where Roland's going. And as he approaches her, he asks her to say it again, and she does. She says, "If you love me, then love me." And this time, he's like, "Yup." And they get down to business. And I love, this is a big section. I'm going to read it all because it's like so important here. But I love, this is a whole section of the book and the importance, like King knows how important this moment is. And he makes it so clear to us here. Ka. They helped each other off with their clothes. They lay naked in each other's arms on summer moss, as soft as the finest goose down. They lay with their foreheads touching, as in her daydream. And when he found his way into her, she felt pain melt into sweetness like some kind of wild, exotic herb that may only be tasted once in each lifetime. She held that taste as long as she could, until at last the sweetness overcame it. And she gave into that, moaning deep in her throat and rubbing her forearms against the sides of his neck. They made love in the willow grove, questions of honor put aside, promises broken without so much as a look back. And at the end of it, Susan discovered that there was more than sweetness. There was a kind of delirious clenching at the nerves that began in the part of her that had opened before him like a flower. It began there and then filled her entire body. She cried out again and again, thinking that there could not be so much pleasure in the mortal world. She would die of it. Roland added his voice to hers, and the sound of her locking her ankles together behind his knees, and the sound of water rushing over stones wrapped around both as she pulled him closer to her, locking her ankles together behind his knees and covering his face with fierce kisses, his going out rushed after hers as if trying to catch up. So were the lovers joined in the barony of Magus, near the end of the last great age, and the green moss beneath the place where her thighs joined turned a pretty red as her virginity passed. So were they joined, and so were they doomed. Ka. I mean, like we said, King does not hold back when it comes to horrible descriptions, but he does not hold back when it comes to beautiful ones as well. This is two characters making love for the first time, and he uses all his skill here to build this beautiful, powerful, like almost like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like it's just this essential like moment in a person's life.
It's kind of elemental.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. It is elemental, and it's this powerful moment where he's all these wonderful metaphors of the power of it. And then at the very end, so were they joined, and so were they doomed. Right? It's just like it's the happiest part in the two of their lives up until this point, but it only means that doom is to follow now that they've done this.
And honestly, I mean, when the audiobook did this part, you couldn't really tell that it was Ka : which it is. It's not Ka period. It's Ka : and then that whole scene, which is almost like saying, this is Ka.
This is Ka. Yeah. What everything is happening here is Ka. Yeah.
I love it. I agree. I mean, it's powerful. It's what's interesting is like, it's not, he's not going for eroticism here.
No.
And like, obviously the subject matter is maximally erotic, but it's not written specifically to be titillating. It's capturing what this sort of experience feels like, on an emotional level more than anything, actually.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of appreciate that because, it's easy enough to write something titillating. Like that's just pushing buttons. And, but this is beautiful, actually.
It is. It's very beautiful. I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good for you guys. Now you're doomed.
Yeah.
So the deed done, and then done again. The pair wonder what to do next. Roland pledges his eternal love, and he pledges to take care of her. She cannot go to Thor, and she will not. Everything is going to be fine now, Matt. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think this is the most teenage moment of this whole thing. Mm-hmm. Him being like, don't worry, I'll take care of you now.
Yeah.
With fucking what, Roland? How are you going to make good on that? You're like, don't worry, I'll take care of you now. But for now, you're going to have to go back with your aunt, and we're going to have to continue to play this extremely dangerous game of tennis with lit dynamite sticks.
Sure.
And yeah, like what the fuck, Roland? So irresponsible.
Yeah. I mean, like that is such a childish pledge, one that he has no power to keep up, but he's going to try as hard as he can. So yeah, that's commendable, at least.
I mean, commendable. Like, this definitely does remind you of like the Romeo and Juliet thing, where it's just like a complete lack of like real willingness to grapple with the realities of the situation, because it's like, we're in love, of course everything will work out for us. And
sure.
And just willful blindness, really. Like that's where I'm going to be hard on the characters, actually, because Roland, like, I feel like Roland should know better, and again, doesn't know better because his mind is not working correctly.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. And of course, we have this pall over this whole thing, because Roland here feels like he's being watched, and he is. Rhea has seen everything in the glass and now knows that secret she implanted in Susan's head was activated right as they made love, and we finally get to learn what that thing was, Matt.
Yeah, holy shit, I was more nervous about this than anything I've been ever in my life.
And turns out it's her hair, Matt. If you remember, she was running her hands through Susan's hair when she hypnotized her, so that was the hint that this was supposed to be your hair. But she was ordered to cut this beautiful long hair. So what do you think about this? When this was set up at the beginning of the story, it seemed like, I think what you even said was that this was like certain doom, right? That this was going to be what led Susan to her death here, is this thing. But this is just a destruction of vanity, not a destruction of a human. What do you think?
Well, I think in a world like this, there like so much of Susan's perceived value to the world is tied up in her appearance. And so Rhea was actually doing something pretty awful to her, because like, imagine if she had done this after her first night with Thorin as Rhea intended. It would have like really shamed Thorin, and would have like confused Susan in a really bad way. Thorin probably would have lashed out at Susan in some way. Mm-hmm. Like, it would have been worse than just being some hair. It would have been about it would have really kind of soured the whole deal, I think. And as it is, of course, now she has this like cut length of hair that signals very specifically to anyone who knows about this curse, namely Rhea, that they did actually do it. Of course, Rhea saw them doing it, so it doesn't really matter. But,
yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? Is like, you could make that argument that, oh, everyone will know now, but the only one who knows, at least right now, is Rhea. So, she already knows. So
it's hard to see how that will come into play exactly, because like, she could just tell anybody and they'd probably believe her. So
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. I just think I think the first time I read this book, I was like, oh, she's gonna fucking kill her. Like this is like, I knew Susan dies at the end of the story, and this is how it's done. That Susan and Roland are gonna come together, they're gonna make love, and then Susan's gonna kill herself because of this implanted thing.
See, interesting. See, my guess, maybe I should have said this. This would have been a good guess, because it's totally wrong, but I don't know why I didn't say it. But my guess was actually that Susan was going to kill her lover, and then she would be executed for it, and that would be how that played out. So,
interesting.
So Susan would have killed Thorin, and then probably been executed. But in this case, like the way I saw it playing out was, she tries to kill Roland, but because he's Roland, he stops her, and that's totally what I thought was going to happen. So I was actually kind of surprised that it was completely different from that.
Interesting. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
So Roland attempts to hypnotize Susan to kind of figure out who told her what and why and all this, but Susan can't go back this far. And there's this very interesting moment here where everything is pink. Like, what? Roland said. What did she whisper? I don't know, Susan said. The rest is pink. Pink? What do you mean? Pink, she repeated. She sounded almost amused, as if she believed Roland was being deliberately dense. She says, aye, lovely, just so. It's a good girl, yar. And then everything is pink. Pink and bright. Bright? Aye, like the moon. And then I think it becomes the moon. The kissing moon, mayhap. A bright pink kissing moon, as round and full as a grapefruit. And so the reason I pulled this out, because it all keeps coming back to the moon, right? The moon has been this kind of constant motif throughout this story. And here we have the glass, the titular glass in Wizard and Glass, this pink thing, compared to the moon.
Yeah, that is interesting. We've had some conversations off air about what the fuck is going on with this moon. Because at first I was like, does this planet have multiple moons or something? And because like on Earth we have phases of the moon, but the moon doesn't look like wildly different by phase. And then I was like, well, hold on, wait a minute. Maybe the moon is just not tidally locked with the planet, so it actually rotates in the sky, and you see different like images as it spins.
Sure.
I think one thing you said is like maybe it just has like different like different shadows cause different kind of appearances on the moon's surface. But
sure.
But I don't know. The moon thing is really interesting to me because it's this element that's, like you said, it's sort of consistently there throughout the story as this harbinger of whatever, of doom, of goodness, of whatever is kind of is happening in the story. But actually, we don't really understand what the deal is with it.
Yeah, yeah. It's very possible that it ends up just being like just a structural element to attach the story to, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been present from the very first chapter, and it continues to be present. Spoilers for next week. The first chapter that we're covering next week is called Under the Huntress Moon. Mm-hmm. So we're continuing this motif again. And
cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating that we've kind of... I've never paid enough attention to just how much King has attached to moon imagery throughout this entire story.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, right there, you connected the moon with the glass, which is very much like a moon. You almost have to wonder if there isn't some supernatural connection between this particular magical glass and the moon. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. So Roland then chooses to wake up Susan from the hypnotism with a rhyme. He says, bird and bear and hare and fish, give my love her fondest wish. And she, of course, says, you're my fondest wish, Roland. You're my only wish, you and you forever and ever. They made love again there on the bank beside the babbling stream, holding each other as tightly as they could, breathing into each other's mouth and living on each other's breath. You. And I love that those last four yous are not dialogue. That's just the narration, right?
Yeah.
You. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, right. It's like the refrain of Young Love.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that this rhyme is what gives our chapter its name. This is called Chapter 10, Bird and Bear and Hare and Fish. And I want to kind of spend some time on why this might be. What's significant about the rhyme used here?
I mean, beyond like the Guardians and their connection to the beams of the tower and to Ka, I don't know. I mean, that's all the significance I had. I mean, also she doesn't get her wish, because she's dead.
True.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if there's some specific answer you want me to give here. But
I wanted you to talk about the Guardians. I was hoping that you would get there. Because whenever we do like bear and turtle, it becomes very obvious, but the other ones aren't so obvious.
Yeah,
or at least the memory of them isn't so obvious. So yeah, this is a rhyme that was built around the Guardians.
I do forget what all the Guardians are, but anytime somebody starts talking about animals, I'm just like, I guess that must be a Guardian. Mm-hmm. Except for Billy Bumblers. For some reason, there's no Billy Bumbler Guardian, unless it's Oi.
Oi is a Guardian.
You didn't say no. He didn't say no, folks.
As the two part, we cut over to Cordelia Delgado, who is returning from the store when she bumps into Jonas, who is standing there between the bear and turtle totems, smiling at her.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe this is too much of a reach, but this is the sort of thing that suggests that Ka is kind of orthogonal to good because, Ka wants what Ka wants. It hides Roland from Jonas when it needs to, and then it hides Jonas from Cord when it needs to. And these are at cross purposes to each other, basically.
Sure.
It doesn't really play favorites with individual people.
Yeah, and I mean, I think important to note that the bear and the turtle are the beam mates, right? So in between the bear and the turtle beam is the tower.
Yeah,
that's where it is.
And that's Jonas here.
Yeah, and so Jonas is standing there in the symbolic tower in this image. Yeah. Very powerful stuff.
Yeah, fascinating.
What I love most about this interaction between Jonas and Cordelia is that King has chosen to show us here how kind of normal he is. Cordelia and Jonas get along and their romance is starting to grow, which can only mean trouble for our heroes. But what we see here is just like a normal conversation where Jonas is almost charming, right? Like, I understand you've taken on additional responsibility in our undeserving town, sighed Jonas. I'm helping out Sheriff Avery, he agreed. His voice had a reedy little tremble, which Cordelia found quite endearing somehow. One of his deputies, Claypool is his name. Frank Claypool, fell out of a boat and broke his leg. How do you fall out of a boat and break your leg, Cordelia? She laughed merrily. This is just like a fun, that's funny what he's just said there. How do you fall out of a boat and break your leg? That's adorable.
It is,
right?
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I love how King's kind of playing that here, where he's just being sweet, and it's very different from the Jonas we've seen before.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, he's charming, and he's clearly operating at more than one level here because on one level he's trying to charm her, on another he's sort of trying to deliver this, kind of inject this suspicion into her mind about about Susan specifically.
He does such a good job with it too. Was there it's interesting because when you read back on it, his purpose becomes very obvious because the first thing he asks her about, before all this funny back and forth about Frank Claypool, the first thing he asks her about is her niece. And your niece, is she well? Quite well, thank you for asking. A bit of a trial sometimes. Was there ever a girl of 16 who wasn't? I suppose not. Yet you have additional burdens regarding her this fall. I doubt if he realizes that, though. And we don't even say who he is in this regard, right? It's literally, it's designed to get her suspicion up, and we see that it works. Yeah.
I mean, it's great. It's great because Jonas, it's easy to think of him as more of a brute, but it's again reminding us he's not a full gunslinger, but he has a similar skill set. He knows how to shoot and he knows how to sweet talk. So all of this scheming that Roland's doing, he's got an older and more experienced schemer on the other side, playing castles with him. I mean, I almost at this point I start to wonder how badly does Roland get thrashed in his game of castles here? Is that kind of the point of all this? Is young Roland thinks he's hot shit, gets into the situation and just loses his whole everything. I don't know. We'll see, right?
Yeah, we will. So Cord leaves Jonas and heads home, seeing Susan and immediately noticing a difference in her, right? A happiness that wasn't there before. A lack of virginity, if you will.
Uh-huh.
Cordelia, on that suspicion brought on her by her conversation with Jonas, pledges to watch her very, very closely.
Yep. Yeah, I think one thing that King nails here is the obliviousness of young people to how they project themselves, because Susan just doesn't realize how different she seems now, and that's going to bite her in the ass. But I think that's very realistic.
Right. And one thing we didn't talk about is obviously Roland and Susan agree that they're going to meet each other more. And they're like, we can use Shimi for a little while, but there's also this rock hidden, and only I and one of my friends know about it. And so you can communicate with me there. And it's just so we're being set up for disaster here, right? I think one thing that's true about all people is they're never as sneaky as they think they're being. And
yes.
I mean, Roland maybe has gunslinger training, but Susan doesn't. And so, yeah, the opportunity to be discovered here grows with each time they interact with each other. And especially when we establish that Susan's aunt is going to be keeping an extra special eye on her, thanks to Jonas. And I think on the flip side of that, if Jonas's purpose here was to recruit Cord to his spying game, then Jonas and his boys are going to be doing the same thing. So on both sides of them, they're going to be very, very closely watched, and yet they can't possibly stay away from each other.
Yep. It's, doom. It's doom.
But then we leave the chapter behind and go to our very, very brief little interlude titled Kansas, Somewhere, Somewhen. And for the first time since the story began, we are back with Eddie and Susanna and Jake and Oy sitting around a fire listening to Roland's story. Did you miss them a little bit, Matt?
I did. It was really nice to get back with these fine folks.
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest complaints about this book, actually, is that by book 3, you have fallen in love with all these characters. And I think I'm safe in telling you now that this book is Roland's story. Like, this is something I kind of debated telling you up front or not, but I think halfway through the book, I think you can probably tell by now that basically the rest of this book is going to be the conclusion of Roland's story. And so that's a lot of people's complaint with this book, is that it just doesn't move the narrative forward very much in regard to the Quartet's quest for the tower. But it's still just a wonderful story about Roland that I love so much.
Yeah, I mean, the framing device, if you will, is basically they defeat Blaine, they wander around Topeka, and then they head off into the Thinny, and then they're just sort of disoriented and not really sure what to do next. And it's like, well, I think the reason for that is you can't actually move on with this quest until everyone understands where Roland is coming from.
Yep. Yeah.
And maybe if you tried to move on with the quest without understanding where Roland's coming from, then it wouldn't work. Something bad would happen. So that's kind of my understanding for what King is doing here and what the story is doing here.
Sure. Yeah. But I do think, like, I'm trying to put myself in the heads of people that, like, are waiting 5 years for this book. I did not have to make that wait. You certainly don't either. But you're waiting 5 years and to find out what happens with Eddie and Susanna and Jake, and you're told basically, well, you're going to be waiting a little more time. That's the frustration people feel. And I actually, like, some people in their rereads of this story skip this book, and I this is my favorite book in the series. So, like, the idea of doing that is just, I don't understand it at all.
Yeah. I mean, not that I'm saying I agree with them, but like I can sort of see wanting to follow like one straight narrative thread through a story, because this does feel like it's stepping aside from the narrative thread. But
sure.
But like we've talked a million times about how this book is this series rather is this like intricate thing involving all this referentiality and looping back in time and people telling stories about telling stories about telling stories, and so like a very Dark Tower thing to do is to have a whole book where most of the book is somebody telling a story.
Yeah. And I think we'll kind of circle back around to this conversation by the time we've completed the book. But I was actually kind of nervous going into this book because I wasn't sure how frustrated you were going to be. I wasn't sure if, like, at the end of every episode you were going to be like, well, what the fuck's going on with Jake and Eddie? I want to see those guys. Why haven't I seen those guys?
When are we going to get to the fireworks factory? I mean, honestly, no. Like, I miss them in the sense that I'm like, oh, I want to get back to these characters that I care about. But King, I think, smartly did not leave us in any kind of cliffhanger other than like, what's the deal with this green crystal palace? That's interesting. What is that? But like, I'm not dying to find out what that is. It's not like the gap. It's not like the end of book 3.
Sure.
So yeah, this is a good time for us to take a little jaunt back into the past. And really, honestly, I mean, I think what, like, I've predicted repeatedly, like, at some point we're going to find out Roland's backstory. We're gonna get and that's what,
Yeah.
Well, I was right. He was saving it up for a giant section of the middle of one of his books.
Yeah. I'm glad you're enjoying it. That makes me very happy. And like I said, I think this is structurally one of Stephen King's best stories ever. Just like removed from The Dark Tower itself, which is already one of my favorite series. This book is just phenomenal, and I can't wait for the second half of it because we're just halfway through, Matt. We got a lot more to talk about.
Awesome.
So back with our characters, Eddie is confused. He's like, wait a minute. How long has Roland been talking? How can he know every corner of the story? How is it still nighttime out? Why don't I feel stiff from sitting down? Why aren't I hungry? Why don't I have to take a piss? What the fuck is going on here? And the answer is basically, it's fucking magic, man. That's just how things are in this world. The night will not end until the story does, which is a really great touch, I think. Mm-hmm. And then with that all settled, the quartet, all of them, even Oi, tell Roland to start up the tale again and to keep telling it until it is done.
Yeah, it almost seems like the quartet are like in a trance where they're not even necessarily just hearing his words. You know, they're maybe kind of caught up in his telling in more of a psychic way. Yeah,
I mean, we've had instances in the story in the past where like someone starts explaining something and a character isn't just hearing it, they see it, right? They're suddenly there. And that's what's happening here is like they're not just listening to a person talk, they are there. They are living it almost.
Yeah. Also, I think that this conceit works a lot better than the part of the Kingkiller Chronicles where Kvothe is telling a story that takes 35 hours to read out loud in audiobook form, but somehow he tells it in the course of 8 hours.
You are not allowed to insult Kingkiller Chronicles, Matt. What is wrong with you? You know that's one of the fundamental rules of Doof Media.
All they had to do was say that it was magic, and I would have believed it, but they didn't, so now I get to make fun of them.
It's fucking magic. There you go. I said it for them.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. That's fine then.
Yeah. So the story begins once again with a line that we're going to spend next week talking about this line, but it was basically like, true love is boring.
Yeah.
Which is just a great line to start the story on again.
It's fascinating. I don't even know what to say about it. Like when I think I don't remember if I actually laughed because you really laugh at things that you hear when you're alone because that would be weird. But like, I thought it was hilarious because it's like Roland is almost like stepping back from the story for a second and being like, oh, what a ridiculous kid this was that I was.
Right.
And true love is boring. It's like, I don't know. I don't entirely know what to make of it yet. It really struck me as like a great, like almost like King himself kind of putting down the book and being like, I know it's silly. You know?
Yeah. I love it. And we'll circle back around to that whole line in more detail when we kind of learn what the framing for it is within the story.
Okay.
But I do think it's just such an evocative way to leave this little interlude and jump back into our story because you are immediately hooked. You're like, that is, I think, the last thing anyone expected Roland to say. In fact, the text makes that clear by having someone's response to that being, say what? Like it's just like we end the midpoint of the story on this love between them has blossomed and they've like embraced each other physically, and then true love is boring. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I wonder if it's hinting that the next phase of this is going to be sort of the honeymoon phase followed by the post honeymoon phase where the luster, the electric feelings when you touch fingertips start to fade, because then true love becomes boring for a lot of people.
Part 3 of the book is called Come Reap, by the way. So
okay,
just if that helps you kind of file away what you think the next part of the story is going to be in your head.
Yeah, like yes, you reap what you sow. Yes. Gotcha.
All right, so that is it for this week's reading, and that is it for part 2, Susan. Like we said, we're about halfway through the book now, and very excited to see what happens next. It's only getting better, Matt. It's only getting better.
Awesome. I like things that are better.
All right, so let's jump into the discussion questions. Last week's discussion question was, what is the most despicable, uncomfortable point of view character in a King novel? Or we let people pick from some other story if they haven't read King. But we've got mostly Stephen King responses. We got a whole bunch of responses. I've learned that you wonderful constant readers out there, whenever I do a question that is like, tell me something about Stephen King you like, you respond very eagerly, and I love it.
Yeah, I'm excited to spoil a whole bunch of Stephen King for myself now.
I think, look, I tried to keep the spoilers to an absolute minimum.
Okay. I trust you. I know. I was joking. Okay. Tringard says, this and Carrie are my only Stephen King books. The most uncomfortable King character I've been in the point of view of so far is Detta Walker. Her crass sex as power mindset combined with the exaggerated racial stereotypes make her voice always a difficult one to share. Nasher was gross, but I don't remember the details of his character in the same visceral way that Detta imprinted on me. Cool.
Yeah. I like that answer. I mean, I think Detta Walker's voice was like by design meant to be that way, right? Like you were supposed to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah. She's just so angry. She's so angry that it seeps into you.
Yeah. Up next, we have Matt Said Words, who says, ones that stick out are Annie Wilkes from Misery and The Kid from The Stand, the expanded edition. A deep cut is The Library Policeman. Yikes. That's actually what we were talking about before, Matt. The Library Policeman. Two monsters, one the supernatural type that feeds on the fear of the other. The other is the man who horribly abuses a child, and we have to read it, and it's awful. It's awful. I agree with you on that one. Matt Said Words. He also says the kid from Apt Pupil. The kid in the story is curious like any smart kid, but we see him devolve into a monster. The scene where he makes the old Nazi SS officer march around his living room in a costume uniform is extremely unsettling. Yeah. Have you ever read or seen Apt Pupil?
No. Is that Stephen King?
Yes.
Oh, I know what it is. I didn't realize it was Stephen King. That's cool.
It's a short story written by Stephen King that they adapted into a movie with Ethan Hawke, I believe. And who else is in it? Someone big plays the Nazi.
Yeah, it's one of those old actors. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, one of those old people.
Yeah.
Oh, that was directed by Bryan Singer. Oof.
Oh well.
It's Ian McKellen, by the way.
Ian McKellen. Yeah.
I'm mad at myself for forgetting Ian McKellen.
I said that, didn't I?
You did. Yeah. You did.
Rob the Gob says King is a genius when it comes to characterization. I find that his despicable / uncomfortable characters are almost more compelling than most protagonists in his books, so that makes it very hard to choose a favorite. To list a few top contenders, I'd say Henry Bowers from It, Trash Can Man and the Kid from The Stand, and the character that has yet to be introduced in the Dark Tower series. King makes you hate these characters but love reading their stories all the same. I mean, not just any writer can write a story from the perspective of a school shooter. Rage, as written by Bachman. Written as Bachman, sorry, and make you almost feel bad for that character. Jack Torrance from The Shining is an especially great despicable character to read because he's not inherently bad. He's a man with his demons, and you slowly watch him turn from a man just trying to salvage his marriage and relationship with his son into a psychotic homicidal maniac. Yeah.
Rage is one of the only novels of King's I have not read because it is one of the only books he has chosen to let fall out of print because he doesn't want people reading it, because obviously school shooting has become an epidemic in our country. And he just felt like he wrote that book a long time ago when he was very young, and it's particularly nasty. And that's the one time I think where he's just like, I would rather people not read this book anymore. And so I've found copies before, but I just kind of like, if the author says, I don't want you to read this novel, I'm kind of like, yeah, I get it. So that's a choice I personally made, but I agree with all those. Those are some great answers.
Cool.
Gerardo says, I'm sorry if I said that wrong. One of the worst characters that stands out to me is the Trash Can Man from The Stand. It's been about 20 years since I've read the book, and I still get chills thinking about him. His character description on Wikipedia, without spoilers, is Donald Merwin Elbert, better known as the Trash Can Man, is a schizophrenic with pyromaniac tendencies. It goes on, but if you give Stephen King a character with that description, you know he's just going to twist the knife as much as he can. Yeah, the Trash Can Man. Matt, we got to read The Stand one day. I can't wait to talk to you about that book.
I can't wait either. Mojo Yashka says, for me, King's most disturbing point of view character is one that's relatively recent. While I'd give honorable mentions to Craig Toomey from Langoliers, the fisherman from Black House, Todd Bowden from Apt Pupil, and a certain later antagonist from The Dark Tower, the one that I really found distressing was the psychopathic Brady Hartsfield from Mr. Mercedes. His point of view sections are, in my opinion, some of the darkest that King has ever written, particularly so when he reflects on his own backstory. Often King will have the point of view antagonist being controlled or manipulated by a greater evil force, something beyond understanding, which makes the antagonist more of an object of pity than an actual driving force in the horrors being perpetrated. Maybe they have a brain tumor, or they touched an alien spaceship, or they're being controlled by a monster clown, or they're being manipulated by a world-jumping agent of chaos. While Brady has a horrific history, his actions are completely due to his own desires and motivations, and to my mind, that makes him an infinitely more monstrous character. I've read all of King's writing, and so it's interesting that a character from the latter part of his bibliography carries such weight for me in this regard. Cool.
Yeah. We're going to have more to say about Brady Hartsfeld because actually multiple people picked them. Luke V actually also picks Brady Hartsfeld from the Bill Hodges trilogy. His answer goes into some spoilers that I will not repeat here, but he agrees with Mojo Yashka's assessment of the character a lot.
Cool. Yeah. Steve D also picks Brady Hartsfield. They also point out the True Knot from the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. Steve goes into one scene involving baseball bat boy that I won't spoil for you folks. But if you've read Dr. Sleep, you know exactly what Steve's talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I've all three of these answers are really interesting to me because I think a lot of people would make the argument that like King has softened a little bit in his older age, that he doesn't, that like really young King, especially young King as Bachman, was really when he gets the darkest and the most uncomfortable. But we had three people who picked a character from some of King's more recent works. Both the Bill Hodges trilogy and Dr. Sleep are books from the 2010s. And I agree with them. These characters are awful and despicable, and being in their head is pretty horrible. So I think King has softened in some ways, and he's still just as potent in others.
Interesting. Obviously, I have no comment on this, but I can see that being a thing as like he kind of matures and loses interest in certain types of I don't know, horror or
yes.
or ways of disturbing people or things that he's focusing on. But that just, I mean, he just seems like the kind of person who is really interested in darkness in general. So I just feel like over time, a person like this is going to just shift his focus maybe to more mature or whatever that means, forms of looking at these issues.
Sure. Yeah. Up next, we have J.L. Libersky, who says, in terms of despicable or deplorable, to use common parlance, this is perhaps too on the nose, but since quarantine, I've read, or listened rather, to Under the Dome, and the 1-2 shots of Big Feelin' It Jim and his Fruit of the Poison Tree Junior Rennie, which are actually two characters that someone used in a question answer last week or a couple weeks ago. I'll be delicate for spoiler concerns, but JL says we need to read all of King's Doorstop epics, Matt. So now we have to do that because it's what Ka wants, and what we've learned is we have no control.
Yeah,
that's what Ka wants.
If you fight it, then it kills you.
Yeah. So they go on to say Big Jim's untempered arrogance and self-justified corruption, and Junior's obsession with Barbie, and also Junior's dalliances with his girlfriends, had me exclaiming or arguing out loud during my walks with my children. The Rennies underline King's ongoing belief that hell is other people, because we all know at least one or more folks like them. Yet for all the despicable people and their discomfort, I think King is an optimist. You just have to see through the grime to find the shine. I agree with that too. I think he is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I get it. I mean, I haven't read that much of his stuff, but I think I know what people mean by that.
Sure.
Indy Y says, I'm fairly new to Stephen King, having read the Dark Tower series and currently going through The Stand. For me, until now, it's The Kid. I had to even give a rest to the book for a while after going through a particular part. We don't get a lot of backstory about him, and I think he is there just to contribute to the development of other characters that are also really bad, but but at least have something where you can sympathize with them. Yeah, I don't. It's funny because like we're probably going to read The Stand, and I'm just going to be like, oh, when we get to the kid or the trash can man, I'm going to know to be worried.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't. Here's what I'll say about those characters. I don't think you know anything that a person reading 3 sentences of their sections would not already know about. How it is very clear very quickly that these people. Yeah,
it makes sense.
Spencer B says probably the most uncomfortable I've ever been reading a Stephen King book is during the Steve Kemp sections of Cujo. There are just no redeeming qualities to the guy. The way King writes him, you can feel anger boiling through the page, and he has very few scenes in the book, which make his appearance have even more of an impact. Every action Kemp makes is just the most base, gross possible choice, and King is pretty unrelenting with the way he describes it. The note he leaves, for example, are just so concisely unsettling. I think the King really effectively created a despicable character in Kemp. Yeah, totally.
Cool.
That fucking guy. Man, Cujo is such a weird book. Part of me loves it, and part of me is like, I can't believe this is a book. Do you know anything about Cujo?
I mean, I know it's about a rabid dog that traps some people in a car or something.
Yeah, that's it. That's the book. That's the whole book.
Well, okay, cool. Rebecca B says, I'm ashamed to say I haven't read many other King books other than Dark Tower, so I will talk about one of the books in the Hannibal Lecter series, specifically Red Dragon. I read it when I was in high school, so it's been a while, but from what I remember, you're dropped into the main villain's mind often, a man who is a sociopath with violent and often uncomfortably sexual urges that is obsessed with a painting featuring a dragon and a woman. He wants to become the dragon in the painting and does so by murdering people in horrific ways. There is also a movie. Do not watch the movie. The movie is terrible. They say, as far as movies go, though, The Voices with Ryan Reynolds is a terrifying movie that drops you into a sociopath's head and shows the world as the sociopath sees it, which the movie sticks with for a while before showing you the reality of what is going on. It's just upsetting. I recommend watching it once. And Ryan Reynolds? Is this a serious movie?
I've never heard of this movie, to be honest with you.
I think I might have seen this. I think
I'm looking it up.
Seen this movie I think I have seen this movie. Yes.
Yeah.
This is I
haven't seen this movie.
It's like it's good.
How have you seen a movie that I haven't seen? That's not allowed.
I don't remember anything about the context.
Okay. Well, now I want to go watch it. But first, up next, we have Eric T., who picks something from the future event in the Dark Tower, so we can't really discuss it yet. But as an honorable mention, Eric picked Jack Torrance from The Shining. He says The Shining is his favorite King novel, and Jack Torrance just sunk into his head. I read the book for the first time inside a single day at around 3 to 5 in the morning. I was starting to wonder where I ended and Jack began. King has a way of making you understand people you would never understand that is completely disarming, albeit uncomfortable. Roland has the same niggling characteristic. Be prepared to see him in every protagonist you encounter going forward. Not because he is automatically the best, but because he is so true and fleshed out that he just automatically makes sense.
I like that. I like that way of looking at characters. Mm-hmm. Jennifer R. says my favorite uncomfortable King character is Jack Torrance from The Shining. Mm-hmm. Honest writing on the ambivalence many or most men feel toward their partners and children is scarce as hen's teeth. Compound that with financial stress and alcoholism, and the horror goes much deeper than campfire entertainment. What can be more horrifying than the potential for evil one can see within oneself?
I love that. I want to read The Shining with you a lot, Matt, because your only reference point for The Shining is the movie. And the book is so different. The character of Jack Torrance is so different in so many ways.
Sure.
And man.
Yeah. It sounds like a compelling experience to kind of read a protagonist's descent into madness portrayed well, because obviously in a movie you don't really get that. You're not in the character's head. You're watching this character, and you don't really get like, okay, what is the process here? Why break down like this? I'd like to read that one. Yeah.
Well, we just keep adding to the list here at Kingslingers. I guess we're doing what would you say, 90? We looked it up earlier, 96?
95 or so, yeah.
Yeah, and the problem is he keeps releasing like 2 a year, so it's just...
It's going to
wow.
be hard
It's going to be a while, folks.
Yeah.
Last but not least, we have Peter B., who says, my favorite comes from The Stand, but a different character this time. Peter says Harold Lauder, especially the perverted mind of an almost incel-type character, and the hate found there is a look into the very particular kind of despicable person, a mind filled with sexism, hate, envy, and a serious nice guy complex. Yeah, the thing that I love about this is The Stand was written in 1985. Well, that's not true. When was The Stand written? No, like 78, I think. Stand is one of his first few books, and he hits the nail on the head with this character that is just something. I think in the age of the internet, we see this kind of person on the internet a lot more, and it makes at least this portion of The Stand such a prescient novel. Matt, we got to read The Stand.
Yep, The Stand, The Shining, bunch of other ones, I guess, in there.
Yeah.
Those ones, those two for sure, though, at some point.
I think we can safely say that my vision for this whole thing was always you and I finish The Dark Tower. We finish the series and we finish any kind of short stories that take place in the same world, which I think there are a couple of. And then we maybe look, okay, what next? If we still want to talk about Stephen King, and then we look at the books that most closely interact with The Dark Tower, The Stand being one of them, as we've seen from this novel we're talking about right now. And then, do those and then see how we feel about that. And then go out a little further, maybe go to a different level of the tower,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always been the plan in my head. I don't know if I told you that, Matt, but now I've told everyone. So now there's pressure for us to do it, which is how I convince you to do things.
Yeah, well, we'll just have to set a Patreon goal or something.
Man, that's smart. Always the businessman is Matt.
Yep.
All right, folks, next week's question. We've reached the midway point of our book and our story of Hambry. So far, which character is your favorite character in Roland's story? And why? No spoilers, obviously. If you love them because of something that happens in the future, don't say that part of it because we won't be able to read it. But which is your favorite Hambry character? There's been a bunch of them, and they're all great, even the bad ones. So which is it?
Especially the bad ones.
Yeah. All right. That is it for us here on Kingslingers. Next week, we begin part 3 of Wizard and Glass titled Come Reap. We will be discussing chapters 1 through 4. Do you like how I said that really optimistic? And
I loved it. Come reap.
I'm trying to keep it positive,
Yeah. I'm just imagining a sign in like happy handwriting with an exclamation point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's great. Of course, remember you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And probably the best place, in my opinion, to give your discussion question answers and to just discuss The Dark Tower with other people is reddit.com/r/doofmedia, where you can find the latest thread for this episode.
If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, what the hell? What are you? I'm upset with you. I'm mad at you.
Yeah.
Do it.
You're wasting your time.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that there are podcasts. It's so easy. You just click that subscribe button and turn the bell on.
It really is that easy.
Yeah.
And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. If you donate to us at the $5 level, you will get access to our monthly Doof and Chill live streams where usually 4 members of Doof Media will hang out on a YouTube live stream for a couple of hours playing games or chatting or doing some other fun, interesting thing. We just did June's, which was a Q&A session with the hosts of our newest show on the network. And I think next month will be a game of Fiasco, which is a very, very fun game. If you've never heard of it, me and Scott have played this game before. It's super fun. I don't know what else to say about it. Anyway.
Yeah, it's so, I think I laughed so much, and I think people are going to really enjoy this. So yeah.
Donating at this level also, and any level actually, gives you access to tons of other cool benefits. So head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and check us out. This week, special thanks to new patrons. We have 4 Bidoofs, Dan B, Jessica Z, Andrew J., and David W. Welcome to the community, everybody.
Yes, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you in our Discord and on our Reddit.
Yeah.
If you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can, of course, help us out by sharing this podcast. We tried marketing once. It was very expensive, so it's not something we can do very often. So we really rely on our listeners to share us. So please share the show with everyone. And please head on over to your podcatcher of choice and leave us a rating and a review. This week's review comes from Green Froggy 4, who gives us 5 stars and says, "A welcome new quartet on the path to the tower. The format is delightful. Scott, the constant reader, and Matt, the fresh set of eyes, use their unique perspectives for this in-depth review and analysis of the work that has been the backbone of Stephen King's career and create a fabulous experience for readers with all ranges of knowledge of this tale. If the best part of going to see a movie with your friends is the hours you spend at a diner going over each plot point and discussing what it means, this podcast will make you feel right at home." And that's so good to hear, because that is exactly what we are going for.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. We really appreciate that, Green Froggy. We really appreciate everyone who has taken the time to give us those rating and reviews. They really do help us. Thank you. You.
Aw.
All right, folks. We'll see you back here next week as the Reap comes, and we're very excited about it. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.